Good morning. Some years ago, in the congregation of which I was a minister, we began a series of conversations around internal renovations and upgrades of our church building. It was prompted by the discovery that in the front wall there was some asbestos that we didn't know about that was beginning to break down and needed to be removed before it would become dangerous. And so in doing this significant work, we thought, well, let's do some upgrades and refurbishment within to make the building more flexible and user-friendly by more people and more groups. Really recognising that this would cause some angst and uncertainty among some people who had been part of this church, some since its inception, and certainly the current church building, which was only about 40 years old, and the third building on the site, some of them had been involved in its construction or their parents had built it. And so important conversations needed to be had, and probably over a few months. In the initial conversation, I remember a group of people for whom this building was precious, sacred, holy, stood up and spoke and were concerned about this whole thing because this had been a place where significant events had taken place. Funerals, weddings, baptisms, serious events in their lives and the lives of their families. They recalled the funerals of their parents or their own weddings or the baptism of themselves or their children. And that these four walls contained the memories and the sacred space of these events of tears and laughter and other things. And the people who built this church, they wanted to honour their memory and what they'd done and not change it too much. Anyway, as the conversations progressed in a series over months, there was a movement I noticed from this building is a sacred space that holds our memories and is really important to actually it was the community of people that gathered in this building, in this space. It was actually the relationships. And they began to discuss and name how it wasn't just my parents' funerals in this place, but it was a community of people that gathered around us, that held us in our grief and our loss, that shared the stories of our parents' lives, or sharing in the joy of the baptism of our children, or our own weddings, or whatever it was. It was the community of people and the relationships that were far more important than the building. The building itself served as a means of bringing people together, for a place where the community could gather, where we could laugh and cry and do things together. And that enabled us to go on. When we realised that it was about relationships and that they are central to our lives, and that relationships are far more important than structures and buildings and even belief systems and ideologies and other things. That relationships are the currency of life. And we realised that this God we worshipped in this space, that we call Trinity, is a relational community of love. And the model for us and our world is relationships. Is relationships of open, honest conversation and truth, and seeking to live together well, reconciled and inclusive, loving, just, generous, sharing, and not exclusive to other people, but an open community where anyone can participate and be welcomed, and where God is present in our midst in some mystical and profound and wondrous way. And this week, the readings that come to us as we continue this journey of Lent are really about relationship and God in relationship. The first one is an ancient story that's well known that comes to the Hebrew people. The Hebrew people who have just been liberated from slavery in Egypt gather around the holy mountain of Sinai. And there Moses goes up and receives the 10 Commandments, the 10 words. And these are about relationships. And the story goes, God says, I am the Lord your God who has brought you out of slavery, delivered you from slavery and oppression out of Egypt. You are to have no other gods before me. Don't make any images or idols or statues or whatever it is of gods in heaven or on earth, anywhere. Don't bow down and worship other things, but relate to me as the one God who loves you and has the power to bring liberation and life and hope. And as I read that, I recognise the gods in our lives, the gods that compete for my attention, money and possessions and the things we accumulate, that take our time and our energy and we protect at all costs. Or our power or status or our career or education or our belief systems, our ideologies, our politics, our fame or celebrity or whatever it is, our house, our garden, whatever it is we hang on to and trust in and hope in and put all our time and energy into, can be a god, an idol. And we recognise when we look deeply that none of these things can save us. Ultimately, we need to let go and trust in this mysterious, wondrous God whom we can't control and we can't own and we can't possess and we can't define and we can't dominate. But this God who is love, who is in the midst of our lives in relationships with one another, with creatures of the earth, our animals and plants and all the things that are around us. God who is with us in strange and mysterious ways, in spirit, who comes to us in music and words and song. And God says, have no other gods before me, but trust me. And then as the 10 words continue, it's about that relationship and what it means. Honour our elders. Do not steal. And then do not steal opens up into do not kill. Do not take someone's life. Do not commit adultery. Don't take another's husband or wife. Don't take someone else's reputation and smear it, and gossip and slander. Don't be jealous of what other people have to the extent that you want to take what they have or kill them for it, deny them. It's about how we live together in relationship, respecting one another and honouring one another and living together. It's really about gathering around this table of life and all being included and sharing and bringing the best of ourselves and what we have for the sake of all people. That's a very different way of being and thinking and living than most of our cultures and communities and nations. And yet that's the vision at the heart of these 10 words. It's not about a legal system, but a relational system. And if we could get into our heads, do not kill. Imagine the changes in the nightly news. So many of the stories are about violence and death. The second story comes from John's story of Jesus, where Jesus early on makes this pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Passover and visits the Holy Temple, sacred site. And as he enters the outer courts, it's like a marketplace. There's buying and selling, there's money changes. You can't take the coin of the realm, which has got Caesar's head on it, which is considered unclean and will defile the temple. You've got to change that money to temple money in the courts before you can go in to make the offering you're supposed to make for the work and life of the temple and supporting poor and so on. But in order to change the money, you charged a fee, a tax. People are profiteering out of changing money. And of course, it's the poor who suffer most. And then there's the sacrificial system. And so the buying and selling are all about animals. Animals for sacrifice. Big animals, small animals, and birds for the very poor. And again, God's grace is about sacrifice. That there's this presumption that if you don't sacrifice in the right way, you must be excluded from God's love. And Jesus knows this is wrong. But worse than that, they're exploiting people, and particularly the poor. The people who can't afford to buy animals can buy birds. But even the cost of birds for some is too much. And exploiting people for God's grace is wrong. And so Jesus takes to it and disrupts the whole place and turns tables over and opens cages and creates chaos, saying God's house is meant to be a house of prayer. And prayer is about relationship, it's about communication, it's about meditation, contemplation, mindfulness, opening ourselves to Spirit, to God, to love, to this voice of love and life that comes to us. It's about relationship, not about profiteering and institutionalising everything. And I guess in this story there is this sense of institutionalisation, of building a temple and creating an institution around it. And the institution codifies the law and the belief systems and the rituals and makes it harder for people to be in relationship and to love. And we do this with our institutions, which are important, which give a structure and a form to organisations and churches and political parties and all sorts of things. They can give structure and form into family life. But they can also deny us freedom. Because institutions demand that we protect them. And we've seen this in the Royal Commission into institutional child sexual abuse, where institutions have been protected by people, where people in institutions have done the wrong thing, but rather than expose the institution, people have kept silent or denied it. And injustice has flourished, and pain, and people have been ripped apart, and relationships have been denied. And Jesus says this is wrong because God's way is about relationship. Relationship comes first. And God goes to great lengths to be in relationship with people and with the world, and invites us into a relational way of being, a ministry of reconciliation, of reconciling all things, and bringing this way of hope and love and peace and faith and justice to flourish in our world and in our lives. And in these stories, what we hear is God reaches out in love. But we, in our egos, our institutions, our need to be in control, push that away and create institutions and forms that are idolatrous and deny people life and break relationships open. And so as we journey towards Easter, where we experience this sense of deep and profound relationship and love in Jesus, who gives himself in solidarity with the world and with all people and all things, who is killed because he loves, because he gives himself in freedom and love to the world. That's our model, that's our way, and that's our hope. And that's the hope for the world, that we need to work hard and live in relationship with each other and those who are different, to build bridges and break down barriers. This is the way of Jesus and the way of life.